After 25 years, One Piece is finally revealing everything!
Excuse me, what?
Luffy's godfruit powers was only the beginning, as the origins of Sun God Nika and the ancient kingdom he was from is confirmed by Vegapunk's announcement to the world. But with over 1,100 chapters, Oda has already revealed more than you think, including the true history. And by using my balls deep future sight, we are going to uncover everything by journeying through the past to the present. Yep, let's rewind 5,000 years back from the current story. Now, the earliest records we have of the One Piece world does stem far beyond even the Void Century, as we know that 5,000 years ago, the Tree of Knowledge was planted by the ancient people of Ohara. Similarly, Arubana Palace in Alabasta was built 4,000 years ago. So it's safe to say by this point, civilization was quite active all around the world. Meanwhile, the moons orbiting the planet were also advancing. Through Enel's cover story, we learned about Berka, the ancient civilization on one of the moons which had advanced technology called automatas. We know that the Berkans, the Shandorans and the Skypians all lived together. However, once the moon had been stripped bare of its resources, its inhabitants were forced to descend onto the planet of One Piece. From this information, we can deduce that the Lunarians are also from a moon. You got Luna right in their names. They got wings like all three of the other groups. It just makes sense. Speaking of things that just make sense, when Robin was reading the poneglyphs in Arabasta, she mentioned something called the Age of Heaven. Though she was hiding intel about Pluton from Crocodile, this still holds weight, as its specific knowledge could have been obtained back at Ohara. So, the Age of Heaven started when all these races evacuated the moons. After all, if I saw 100 of these winged beings descending from the sky, some of them even having halos, then you better believe that I would think they were from heaven as well. Not only that, but the Lunarians used to be known as a kingdom of gods, which existed on the Red Line before Marijoa was constructed. The people from the moon found new homes on either the Red Line or the Sky Islands, and just like Luffy had, humanity below them would see their shadows and think of them as deities existing above. And so, this time period became known as the Era of Heaven. However, over time, the Sky people fell into obscurity and myth, and 1,500 years before our current story, we would enter the Age of the Sea Circle, and by extension, the current date system used within the One Piece world, meaning this would be our starting point for the year 0. Eras tend to be representative of the age and values associated with the people who lived within them, and so this era was known as the Sea Circle, as this is when the world had mastered the Grand Line, one big circle which wraps around the globe. Because of this, the age of exploration was in full swing. With sea navigation and a path around the world now on the table, humanity spread their reaches to every new island they could find, and by extension, colonization was soon to follow. Whereas some kingdoms would firmly establish their own defense and world power, as 400 years later, the City of Gold, Shandora, would prosper with the descendants of the previous inhabitants from the moon. Giants would also come together under one king in the island of Albath, where the ancient tree Adam was planted. The sister of that tree was also growing large and strong at the bottom of the ocean, where the Queen of the Sea, Poseidon, would finally be done taking charge of its well-being, and looked forwards in relocating her people back to the land. The Eve tree had grown far enough through the Red Line, where its maintenance was handed over to the Lunarians. Another 100 years later, Zenisha would be born. This later giant elephant's existence would be key to the coming events that would shape the entire course of history as we know it. The country of Wano would also be established as a major player during during this time, alongside the most important nation of all, the ancient Kingdom of Dawn. For now, we will use that as a placeholder for its name. The Kingdom of Dawn would prosper to become the strongest world power in its time, mainly due to the diplomatic relationship and advancement of technologies through collaboration with the people of the moon alongside other races. However, not every part of the world was going through a renaissance, as races like the Long Arm and Long Leg tribes were forced to fight between themselves over their limited resources and land, leading to the millennia-long conflict which still goes on to this day. Other races like the Tontatas would be forced to appease humanity. At this point in time, they were persecuted and edged towards extinction. But King Don Quixote of Dressrosa offered them safety and the resources they needed in exchange for labor, only for the Tontatas to be taken as slaves to enrich the people of Dressrosa. However, the Tontatas weren't the only ones. In fact, hidden from the modern world is an entire era of slavery. Other nations governed by human-like figures would choose to progress due to this means as to compete with the technological power of the Kingdom of Dawn. Yep, not having robots kinda leaves you in a pretty bad disadvantage, so they needed slaves. As a response, a man from the Kingdom of Dawn would journey through the world liberating those who were oppressed, where with a new power of sun god Nika, he would spread happiness and freedom everywhere he went. However, he failed. This point in time, from roughly the year 600 to 700, is known as the Void Century, and as the world emerged from this period of darkness, we'd have a world government that ruled over the majority of the planet. But what's happened over these 100 years that allowed one single group to overwhelm everyone and everything that was thrown at them? In reality, the Void Century is the story of a world war between two groups. First, the Great Kingdom of Dawn, who spread their influence to every corner of the world. It was led by a man with mysterious powers to shape reality to his will, the original Joy Boy, who stood as a symbol of peace and equality. However, this mentality was also supplemented by three powerful weapons at their disposal. But these weren't weapons in the traditional sense. Poseidon allowed Joy Boy and his crew to speak and control sea kings, freeing the world from one of the most dangerous predators on the waters. Uranus could control the weather and bring ease of mind to some of the crazier places along the Grand Line. And Pluton, the ultimate battleship, could be used to shatter the Red Line and truly connect the world into one piece. Sure, these could be used to conquer the world, but in Joy Boy's hands, they were tools of liberation. It wasn't just these weapons though that made the Great Kingdom powerful. Vegapunk theorized that they were also technologically advanced, as seen in the vestiges left behind like the Iron Giant. As for Joy Boy's crew itself, this is where the Will of D originated, by taking in people from all around the world, giants, fishmen, Lunarians, and even someone unsuspicious named Saint Nirona Emu. Joy Boy sailed the sea as a symbol of unity and freedom. Those who followed Joy Boy donned the initial D. They would be the disciples of the sun god who brought the dawn of a new free age to the world. We often hear about how the D clan is all a family. After all, the name is passed down from Garp to Dragon to Luffy and from Roger to Ace. However, it didn't start that way. Originally, this idea of family was less about blood and more akin to Whitebeard's family. It is just those who followed Joy Boy and his ideology, and that is why we get not just humans but also giants like Jaguar D Soul inside of the D clan. Now, not everyone in the D clan needed to have exactly the same goals as Joy Boy. All that mattered was that they sought to live freely under the one sun. This is something that can take shape in many ways. For example, Joy Boy wanted to liberate slaves. Garp wants to free people from the threats of pirates. Dragon wants to topple the world government. Blackbeard, yeah, well, you know, he just wants to liberate the world by taking over it. And Ace wanted to be free to live his own life without chains of lineage tying him down. Every D clan member fought for some kind of freedom and the ability for people to choose their own paths. And on their journey to spread peace, the single most important place they would visit was Fishman Island at the depths of the ocean. The reason this location was so important was because the Fishman Fishmen were the first civilization and carried the responsibility of growing and protecting the Sun Tree Eve. Whilst the Fishmen watched over the tree roots, the Lunarians acted as guardians of its branches above the red line. However, because the Fishmen had lived under the sea for so long, humanity had completely forgotten about them, now seeing them as some kind of lesser monsters that were heavily discriminated against. Witnessing this injustice, Joy Boy commissioned the creation of the ship Noah and promised the people of Fishman Island that he would eventually bring them to the surface and ensure they could live peacefully under the sun. However, everything changed when Joy Boy's crew finally saw the Sun Tree Eve. This tree had a special ability to absorb sunlight and transfer the light to its roots, which reached down to Fishman Island and lit the sea up. At the same time, the roots absorbed the energy of the sea and would bloom from its branches above the red line. These fruits, when imbued with the wish and haki of a person, would manifest into power-giving fruits, which grants the dream of that person. The Lunarians acted as protectors of Eve's devil fruits to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. But when they met Joy Boy and saw his powerful belief in spreading peace, they offered him an opportunity to make a wish, which generated the sun god Nika fruit. This would assist him on his mission going forward. Eve was truly a miracle, a tree that could grant people special abilities fueled by the sun and the sea. It could manifest the desires of those that dreamt. But where anything special exists, so too will there be people who covet it. And that person ended up being on Joy Boy's crew. Imu D. Judas was jealous of the sun god, and when they saw the great tree Eve's power to create devil fruits, they wished to harness it for themselves.
Just like how you can harness the power of GamerSupps using code ABD for 10% off. Maybe if Joy Boy drank some of it, he wouldn't have fumbled so hard. But Imu D. Judas betrayed him in pursuit to take over the red line and have control of the Eve tree. Imu had come up with a plan that would shake the current world to its core. First, she reached out to 19 other kingdoms and warned them of Joy Boy's goals to unify the lesser races. In some cases, winning those other nations over would be simple. After all, not everyone was on board with this message of peace and equality. For example, Dressrosa was prospering off of the Tontada slaves, so this liberating sun god was a problem for them. And if they managed to topple the current world power, then they would be able to take over as the new gods of the world. In other cases, such as when Imu approached Queen Lily Nefertari of Alabasta, she would spin a web of lies to lure her in. Imu would tell her that this was not a peace-building nation, but instead a kingdom of conquest looking to take over every island they could reach. After all, what else could they be using those three all-powerful weapons for? As a result, these 20 royal families and their kingdoms would form an alliance and launch an all-out war against the Kingdom of Dawn. But this was only under the condition that Imu would be able to cripple their defense from the inside. Being very close with Joy Boy and his friends, Imu targeted a young Zunisha who had grown under the care of the Wano ambassador in the ancient kingdom. He would be none other than Amatsuki Toki's father. Knowing this, Imu tricked Zunisha by using his intel of Toki's father as leverage. Consequently, Imu gained control over Uranus, which was supposed to be protected. With this weapon and the combined forces of the 20 nations, the Great Kingdom was overwhelmed and things began to look bleak. Now, this Kingdom of Dawn was not completely alone in this conflict. Giants, Lunarians, Shandorians, Fishmen, Minks, and the people of Wano would come to their aid. However, even with all these reinforcements, they were on the back foot. But not before Lily D. Nefertari had a chance to finally meet the so-called villain Joy Boy. When they spoke, Joy Boy would try to convince Lily that he was innocent and only wished to bring freedom to the world, swaying her to join Joy Boy's cause. However, being from a strong nation that believed in righteousness, Lily wanted to stop Imu in her own way, so she decided to continue playing the part of Imu's ally. Yeah, let's see how that turned out. With one blast from Uranus, the Kingdom of Dawn never existed in the first place. Joy Boy, finally realizing this war was lost, he cooked up a plan even greater than Imu's, a 800-year balls-deep master plan. After confiding in an oracle who had the greatest observation future sight in existence, Joy Boy understood his time was near. But he shall one day returned to bring the world back from the darkness it had fallen into. Joy Boy ordered his friends to disperse to safety, which included a young Toki whose father ordered her to return to their homeland Wano. In a rush, her devil fruit power skipped her into the future. Fearing that these new enemies would erase them from the history, Joy Boy reached out to the Kozuki family, who had just discovered a new way to create inscribed messages on indestructible stone cubes called poneglyphs. Since the war came to its end, the people of Wano would also take Pluton and hide it, flooding their own country and building a new one on top of its ruins. Then they sealed themselves off from the rest of the world and remained in isolation to this very day. Of course, Joy Boy knew that he would never be able to keep his promise to the fishmen at this rate of bringing them to the surface, and so he had the people of Wano create a poneglyph apologizing to them and vowing to one day return and fulfill his oath. Finally, he hid a message for the future on Laugh Tale, and right after went full throttle to attack Marie Joie, where he would die, leaving his gigantic hat behind for Imu to store away. With Joy Boy out of the way, Imu would take the 19 kings to the top of the red line where the sun tree Eve had grown. Most of the Lunarians had been killed in the war, and with the threat of another attack from Uranus, the remaining Lunarians were forced to go into hiding. It was here that these 20 kings would create the world government, dubbing themselves celestial dragons and planting their hooves firmly upon the people down below. They constructed their new homeland of Marie Joie and harvested the devil fruits from the sun tree Eve to solidify their rule. No one could oppose them anymore. However, while most of the rulers were overjoyed from becoming the de facto kings of the world, there was one who was riddled with guilt, Queen Lily Nefertari. She had been unable to thwart Imu and blamed herself for the death of her friend Joy Boy. After seeing the carnage and destruction caused from this alliance, she planned to leave Marie Joie as her purpose to stay was no longer needed, but not before taking responsibility for securing the poneglyph that were circulating around the world. When Imu and the Holy Knights captured these stones, she was entrusted to deliver it to Marie Joie, but on the way, she claimed the remaining resistance attacked her and took it away. This mistake would forever haunt Imu till this day. But to make matters more sus, Lily left the Celestial Kingdom, giving up her right as a god of the new world. She would cover her tracks by stating that she had lost the right when she failed to successfully bring back the poneglyphs. This excuse convinced Imu, but Lily mysteriously disappeared, leaving her brother to take on the throne of Alabasta. But things were getting interesting in Wano too, where Zunisha would be punished for being tricked by Imu and letting her get a hold of Uranus. As a result, Zunisha was sentenced to wander the ocean. We would then enter a new era with the world government ruling the seas to establish the unjust and discriminatory authority of the Celestial Dragons, who all by this point would have eaten the devil fruits bore by the Eve tree. However, the devil fruits would only protect them until the first generation of Celestials had passed away. After that, the fruits would be reborn into the world and anyone could find them. Time was on the side of the people, and knowing this, Imu wished to make their greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. By forbidding anyone from talking about what had happened, Imu could weaken the resolve of their subjects. By the time the devil fruits made it into the hands of humanity so that they could actually fight back, they would not even remember what they were fighting for. But even so, no matter how hard Imu and the world government tried, the will of D managed to survive and was passed down through the annals of history from like-minded people who would make themselves the enemy of these new gods. Right at the end of the Void Century, the government then starts the construction of the island bridge known as Tequila Wolf. This bridge is still under construction 700 years later without even reaching a single island. Their goal is to connect the islands of the world, but it instead becomes a symbol of Imu and the Gorosei's hollowness. Countless slaves and lives are lost on this aimless task. It represents how the Celestials and government don't see these people as humans. They are simply like worker ants who have no purpose other than to serve. Even the island pullers such as Ors are a victim of this age, as nearly all are wiped out by the government while Ors's body is frozen in ice. However, just as darkness still existed, so too did the will to bring light. And that brings us to the journeys of Mount Blanc Noland 4 years before the current timeline, or at year 1122 of the calendar. While not a member of the D-Clan, Noland is the epitome of what it means to carry on the will of Joy Boy. When Noland found the suffering dwarves of Greenbit, he stood with them and protected them from slavers of Dressrosa, ultimately freeing them just as Joy Boy would have done. But Noland's connections to Joy Boy would continue when he landed on Jaya. The Shandorans of Jaya were some of the last remaining people who stood with the ancient kingdom of Dawn and remembered the sun god. However, over 400 years of this history being passed down generation by generation, it had become warped. This is where Noland comes in. When he finds Calgada and sees the Shandorans trying to sacrifice someone to appease the sun god, he calls out the flaws in their worldview, saying, sacrifice this, lives that. How does that make your gods happy? If your gods value your lives, wouldn't they have contempt for these ceremonies? By bringing their current beliefs about Nika into question, Noland frees the Shandorans of their fear and reliance on the sun god by treating their seasickness epidemic, allowing them to live freely once more. Ironically, in this instance, showing that sometimes the will of D must side against the sun god, or at least the image people have of him. Some glimmers of light did start shining through though. 200 years ago, when the world government made an alliance with Fishman Island after centuries of discrimination. Finally, slavery is prohibited to secure a peace agreement, which allows the Ryugu kingdom to attend its first reverie. But we all know things didn't work out because slavery is still practiced against the merfolk in the current era, while the hatred for Fishman is at an all-time high. So what happened? Well, just like in the future when Shirahoshi came to the reverie only to be shown Charlos's level 100 harassment, a similar event had taken place at this time. However, due to the influence of Otahime, the results were very different this time around. Due to her goodwill against Midgard, he saw the wrong in the celestial ways and protected Shirahoshi from becoming Charlos's slave. But 200 years ago, no such goodwill could be found. Thus, the mermaid princess of that time was turned into a slave of the Celestials. That's why the ancient robot on Egghead was also activated to try and get her back. Currently, it can only be activated by Luffy going Gear 5. Something to do with Joy Boy's energy compels it to act. Another piece of artifact that wields similar powers to Nika seems to be the steroid drug pills ingested by Hody Jones. These pills must have been a creation of the Ancient Kingdom or the Allied Kingdoms trying to replicate the power of Joy Boy. However, just like the defective fruits created by Vegapunk, the effects of these pills had downsides. One of them literally turning your body into an old man, similar to when Luffy overuses his Nika powers. But unlike Luffy, who can pump his heart back up again, Hody couldn't. So what if these pills are actually the power source for the ancient robot? And 200 years ago, the contents of the Tamate box was opened and used by a rogue unit of fishmen to allow the robot to scale the red line and save the princess, paralleling the actions of Fisher Tiger in the future too. Moving on to 100 years ago, quite a lot of things start to happen. From Dory and Broggy starting their duel, the birds of Brook, Roger, Rocks, Garps, all the big players of the previous generation, which converges halfway through the century during the events of God Valley 38 years ago. Now, if you guys want to learn more about that, then watch this video on screen right now.